Hi everyone, and welcome to That's Wild, a podcast series brought to you by the National Parks Board. I'm Elliott and I'll be your host for this series where we'll be talking to special guests from the nature community about topics surrounding biodiversity conservation in our city and nature. In today's episode, we'll be talking about frog conservation. And frogs are such fascinating creatures. These guys can leap large distances, many times their body length, camouflage in their environment without a trace, and make a whole range of unique sounds, amongst other cool things. And so many of them are living in our midst. I'm sure you guys have heard them around Singapore, but they're often harder to spot, let alone identify. So with me today are Ingg Xin, Ingg Thong, and Yin Xin. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, Elliott. My name is Ingg Thong. I'm one of the 6 co-founders of the Herpetological Society of Singapore, and I am also a zoologist.
Hi guys, I'm Yin Xin. I'm also another co-founder of the Herpetological Society of Singapore, and I'm also a zoologist. Side note, I'm also Ingg Thong's brother.
Yes, there's that as well.
Hi, my name is Yin Xin. You can call me Ings. I'm from the National Parks Board Singapore, from the National Biodiversity Centre, and also outside of work, I'm also part of HSS.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. So I think that kind of clears things up for us. We're going to head into a very confusing podcast with both your names sounding very similar.
A convergent
Ings
evolution.
And yeah,
Yes.
convergent evolution. Yeah, so I thought we'd start off by, why do you guys love frogs?
For me, really the love for frogs came from seeing them in the field. The first herp we saw when we started herping was actually a frog, or one of the first.
Right.
It was, I believe, the masked rough-sided frog. We saw it in Treetop Walk, Darling Stream, and that was actually one of the first herps we photographed as well. So that kind of like started the ball rolling, I would say.
For me, I recall as a kid, I think I was like 5 or 6 years old, I had this small pocket guidebook by Discovery Centre. It's like Reptiles and Amphibians of Singapore. And then on the cover, it's this common tree frog.
I know that one. Yeah.
Yes, that one, right?
The
Yeah.
small one.
Yeah, so I always brought this around with me as a kid and was walking around. Then I recall walking to Botanic Gardens and I actually saw one 4-line tree frog like sleeping on a
Wow.
leaf. And I was like, damn, this is like, I can identify it with this tiny book.
Mhm.
And then that's when I started liking like frogs. Yeah.
A bit like birds, right? They're kind of everywhere if you know where to look.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you pay
exactly.
attention,
Yeah,
and
you pay
like,
attention,
it's
yeah.
like a hidden gem. Yeah.
Right.
I can't remember when I started liking them, but when people ask me the question, I'm like, what's there not to like? They are
That's very
cute.
true.
Right,
They
yeah.
come in all kinds of colours. They make all kinds of calls. And they just, good vibes. They're just
Yeah, they are good vibes. I think there's something about frogs that makes them so popular in meme culture also.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
I thought it
Yeah.
was just my feed because I get a lot of frog memes
Yeah.
and I like frogs, so I thought maybe it's just my feed. But I realized in general people get frogs on their feed, Instagram or like
Yeah.
TikTok or whatever all the time.
I think the one that I'm most aware of, it's Wednesdays, my dude.
Yeah, the budget frog, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I think for me also, I don't know if you all remember, but when I first started getting into like nature stuff, I did reach out to you all to learn a bit more about frogs. I don't know if you all remember, we went to Bishan Park.
Yes, we went to Bishan Park. Then we saw a reticulated
Yeah, we
python
saw
in all the
that was
bushes.
Oh,
pretty
yes,
amazing.
yes,
that
right,
was
right.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I'm not as into herbs as you guys. I'm more of like a generalist. But there's just something about frogs that sticks out to me. They're cute, as you said, and then they have this very peaceful kind of vibe.
Yes.
Yeah. In general, people do kind of gravitate towards frogs. And then there is like this other group of people who kind of think frogs are this, slimy, kind of gross group of animals. And this probably comes from, folk tales and things like that. So in your experience, I guess, in HSS and working in NParks, and I guess you do interact with the public quite a bit as well, what are the common perceptions of frogs?
So I would say, because in HSS we deal with a lot of animal conflict as well, human-wildlife conflict, where a lot of people are generally very scared of reptiles, more specifically snakes. Thankfully, frogs are actually an outlier in this situation, where most people that we meet, they are at the very most they're indifferent. We do know
Right.
1 or 2 people who are terrified of frogs, but they don't go after frogs the way they do snakes. They're just scared to see them and interact with them, but they
Right.
don't necessarily want them dead. I would say the main issue that we have as a society facing outreach for frogs is the fact that although yes, it's quite popular in meme culture and people are aware that they're around, it's difficult to get them interested in the conservation of frogs because not a lot of people, as in our experience, understand the importance that frogs play within the ecosystem.
Right. And then following up on that, what is the importance of frogs in our ecosystem?
They are a great bioindicator. So they are great indicator species of the health of an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So the presence or absence of certain species can actually indicate the health of that particular patch of forest. Yeah.
And to add on to that, I think because they have such a unique life cycle where there's an aquatic component and a terrestrial component, so it actually shows how pristine your forest is. The forest streams need to be pristine, or like some water body needs to be pristine, and the terrestrial side needs to also be relatively intact. So if any one part of this reproduction cycle is broken, then you lose some frog species. But there are some species that have actually adapted to this, where they've removed the need for relying on water bodies, and they can just metamorph inside the egg. So they have a direct development from an egg to a froglet.
Yeah. And they're also important in the food chain. First, they control the insect population, which is their prey population that they eat. And they're also biomass for other predators, like other things like snakes and birds also eat them. So they're also important parts of the food chain as well.
Right. I think that's the one that's most often, forgotten. It's like the role in the food chain.
Yeah.
But you guys mentioned bioindicators, they're quite sensitive to things. It also means that they are more sensitive to threats to their environment, and I guess fragmentation as well, because they are restricted to pools of water.
Yeah, and I think they are quite when it comes to dispersal abilities, they are not like a bird that can fly.
Right.
Or even a large mammal like pangolins. Okay, pangolins not very large, but like
larger creatures.
Larger than a frog.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because like the home range of like a frog is maybe like a few square meters.
Yeah.
Right.
And they are not known to be highly dispersive.
Right.
And I suppose not only that, because with fragmentation and habitat degradation, especially within Southeast Asia, the first thing to drop usually is the humidity within the forest. And quite a few frog species, at least the ones that are found in primary rainforests, require very high humidity.
Right.
So which is why some places in Singapore, or some species that are common elsewhere, are a lot more difficult to find in Singapore. Yeah, it could be due to the humidity. Yeah,
exactly. Because some of the habitats they require, like for example, freshwater swamp forest, primary rainforest, these are very rare habitats in Singapore actually.
Yeah, and then talking about conserving frogs, apart from the reasons that you guys mentioned, importance to ecosystem, why should we conserve them? Is there any like cultural links to frogs? I don't know if we mentioned it before, but I guess they eat insects, right? Pest control also plays into it a bit. But any cultural links to Singapore or the wider like region?
Frogs have always been very closely linked to rain, and in many cultures, not only in the region but across the world, they're often seen as bringers of rain. So whenever you have frogs calling, the immediate assumption is that it's going to rain. So people associate, they think the frogs are actually the ones bringing the rain, when it's kind of correct but not completely correct, because frogs are able to, at least within the region, they're able to feel the drop in air pressure before rain comes. So that's why they actually start calling before the rain actually comes.
Right.
And also, I think in like feng shui culture, there's the three-legged frog, right? Something like that, where if you put it in the toilet, it brings money or something like that.
Is it the one with the coin?
Yeah, the coin in the mouth.
Oh,
Yes,
I
that's
didn't know
the
it
one.
had three legs.
Yeah.
I thought it has 4 legs.
Yeah, I think it's like a tree. Yeah, I think it has 3 legs. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Cool.
And actually, we have one species that's quite well known in Southeast Asia to be able to sort of predict the incoming storm.
Right.
Because so the Malayan horned frog,
Oh,
yes, you always hear them calling 15 minutes or like 10-15 minutes before a huge storm
Wow.
comes.
Yeah.
Although that species is getting rarer and rarer.
Yeah, unfortunately here it's like almost impossible to find, except in the
I think it's
nature reserves,
restricted.
deep in the nature reserves.
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah.
restricted.
Yes.
Bukit Timah,
Restricted
yeah,
habitat.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this is one species that we have in Singapore, but I thought maybe we could go and explore, the other different species that are in Singapore. So how many frog species do we have here? I know you guys just released a poster, right, of
Oh yes, okay.
HSS
Yeah,
released a poster,
yeah.
right, of all the frogs in Singapore.
So Singapore has actually 24 species of native frogs and 5 + 1 introduced species, depending on how you want to determine what an introduced species is.
Let's talk about the 24 native frogs then. Like, what are some of the more common ones that people can find? There's some that they can find around their homes, but then there are a lot that you would have to kind of go out into nature to find. Do you have a favorite species? Do you have a few favorite species?
I think a common one is one that Ingg Thong mentioned is the four-line tree frog. It's something that is really commonly found in both urban areas and also in the parks. And I think a lot of people can easily see them in their parks. And like for example, when we do our guided walks, usually the first place we will look is the toilet.
Yes.
Because there will be one or two four-line tree frogs hanging around and we'll
Right.
just point out to the participants. So that's like a great start to the walk.
Definitely, yeah.
Could you all
Yeah.
describe the four-line tree frog a bit? Because it's a podcast, so the listeners will only be able to kind of imagine what the frog looks like.
Yeah, the ones in Singapore are actually quite varied. Some of them have lines on their back, therefore that's why they're called the four-line tree frogs. So they're brown with like dark lines down their back. But some of them are so pale,
Yeah.
they just kind of look brown.
We've
And some
also
of them are like have a leopard print patterning on it without any visible stripes on it. So, and others are like orange in color with no stripes on it. So and some are very pale, almost white with no stripes. Some of them have stripes. So it's the four-line tree frog is a misnomer. Personally, I prefer to call it the common tree frog.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because it is very common and it can be found on trees.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a frog.
Yeah, and they pose really nicely for photos. For tree
Yeah.
frogs,
Yes, yeah.
they have this like nice pose where they hold onto the branch.
like a Spider-Man
Yeah.
pose. or
Like a
something.
Spider-Man
Exactly.
pose, yeah.
yeah. Ingg Thong, what other ones do you have?
I mean, I'm very, very huge fan of like your masked rough-sided frog.
Right.
It has a very, very nice call. Oh, but I guess we'll go into calls later. Lah. It's a swamp forest species. So it likes like inundated stagnant pools of water. It has a very beautiful tadpole. The tadpole looks like an eel and has no pigment. So it's just a bright pink elongate tadpole. Very cool looking. And the males actually have like this enlarged humeral gland. So it looks like it has massive biceps. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really cute.
Haven't noticed that yet. But then, that's one of the frogs that you hear a lot more often than you see, right?
Oh yeah,
Yes,
for sure.
yes,
Yes. Personally, I really like the black-eyed litter frog.
Oh, I was about to say.
Yeah, it's so
yeah.
cute. Like, and they have such an adorable call as well. It sounds like a rattling like gun. Yeah, and like I love how when they're calling and when they're active, they're kind of like propped up on their forearms, and they look very like nice and like almost stoic.
Yeah.
And then like the second you shine light on, they just crouch down.
And they think you can't see them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, they will just
Yeah.
freeze up.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though they have like huge eye shine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have really lovely black eyes.
Yeah.
Any recent discoveries or like observations or findings that you guys think excite you guys the most?
So the most recent addition to Singapore's list of frogs would be the Subaraj's paddy frog.
Right.
We share a lot of species with the surrounding area, either Peninsular Malaysia or Borneo or the Riau Islands. The Subaraj's paddy frog is special because it was described from Singapore. So Singapore, we found a population of frog that we realized was actually different from all of its other closely related species, and we actually helped describe it. And we named it after our mentor, Subaraj Rajathurai. He's one of the pioneer naturalists in Singapore. Yeah, unfortunately, he passed in 2019.
Right. And what were the special characteristics about this frog species?
Oh, okay. So that whole group is like quite messy.
The group of frogs.
No, the genus,
Oh,
is
genus,
like
yeah.
Miculata, they all look the same. Like honestly, if you look at the research paper, like there's so many that were recently described in the past like 4 years. They look very, very similar to each other. The main differences would be, I think, definitely molecular.
Right.
Because when we found it, we actually thought it was Miculata inornata, which was from Sumatra. Then subsequently in 2020, a paper was published restricting inornata to Sumatra only. So everything outside of Sumatra was probably something different.
Else.
So then it kicked off a race. So like people in Thailand, Malaysia were describing quite a few new species.
Right.
Then we realized like, hey, okay, we should actually take a look at the population in Singapore to see if it's like allied to any of the ones in the region. Then we realized it actually was not comparable to any of the other populations. Then that's when we decided to describe it as a new species. Yes.
It's time for Nature Nuggets. In the spirit of our podcast title, That's Wild, we wanted to ask our guests to recommend something wild that they've come across or enjoyed, and that you can check out yourself too.
So I've actually brought 2 copies of the Amphibian Fauna of Peninsular Malaysia. While it does say Peninsular Malaysia, it probably includes Singapore as well. This is a quite uncommon and rare book that was published in 1975 by P.Y. Berry. So she was a Malaysian author doing research on frogs in Malaysia. And that you can actually look through the book and you can see all these really nice illustrations. And when you actually take a look at the photos included in the book, you realize why the illustrations are so lavish and detailed. It's because at that time in 1975, photography equipment had been quite poor, and most of the photos are just in black and white. And it's probably not very clear to see anatomical differences. And so the main differences in distinguishing different species apart are illustrated quite beautifully in this book.
So I have here two books. One is called the Field Guide to the Frogs of Borneo, and the other one is called the Field Guide to the Snakes of Borneo. These are great guidebooks because Singapore shares quite a fair amount of species with not only Borneo but Peninsular Malaysia as well. So these books are great for if you want to learn more about our local species, but not only that, you can learn about what's found in Borneo and the immense amount of biodiversity over there. And it helps that the photos are amazing in these books as well.
And are these books quite readily available, or do you have specific sites that people can go to order them?
You can find it on Amazon. I'm pretty sure Kinokuniya has them as well. I don't think Popular has them.
Yeah, so my recommendations are not guidebooks. Mine are some natural history books that I greatly enjoy. These are like my favorite ones. So the first one is The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Brusatte. He's a paleontologist. So he talks about the evolution of dinosaurs from before what dinosaurs are termed as in taxonomy. So he goes from how they evolved and then how they went extinct and now, are found in birds. And then also because his book was so well received, and then he moved on to study more on other things and not just dinosaurs. He actually moved on to study about mammals. So he wrote a sequel called The Rise and Reign of Mammals. So this is more about like how mammals evolve, and it ends with like about humans. These are two books, natural history books that I really, really enjoyed.
Right. Thanks, guys. Definitely going to check some of these out. But for now, let's hop back into our main convo. And I think we touched a bit on threats, but I'd imagine that, it's one of the reasons why some of these frog species are getting rarer is because there are increasing threats to their existence. So I was wondering whether we could touch a bit more on what are the major threats that frogs in Singapore face.
Yeah, I would say habitat loss and fragmentation.
I would add maybe potential pollution of streams and stuff, like maybe illegal dumping of waste chemicals and stuff. Yeah.
Right. And I guess those are the threats, but what conservation efforts are there in Singapore to kind of try and address these threats?
So NParks, we have the Species Recovery Program that was started in 2015. So this was part of the Nature Conservation Master Plan. So we identify species that are of conservation significance, usually those that are threatened, so like vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered species. So currently there are around 120 plant and animal species that's under this program. So we come up with a species action plan, and the aim is to try to increase their population and try to improve their status, their conservation status. So one of the species that was identified was the cinnamon bush frog. So it's a very, very beautiful frog. It's like kind of reddish orange in color. Unless you scare it, then it becomes a little bit more yellow. but yeah, usually it's like this beautiful reddish color, and they have the cutest call. It goes like beep 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 beep.
Yes, that's
very cute. Yeah, so
beautiful.
So besides it being very cute and very charismatic, it is also the conservation status is vulnerable. Yeah, the cinnamon bush frog is classified as vulnerable under the Singapore Red Data Book. So the Singapore Red Data Book is a list of all the native species that we found in Singapore and their conservation status as assessed by experts. So we have different experts looking at different taxa of animals and plants, and then the latest one is the Singapore Red Data Book 3. So you can access it on the NParks website.
So the statuses in the book are applicable to Singapore's context, right? It's not the global context, yeah.
Yes. So there was efforts to try to translocate it to other areas. So in 2017, 2018, there were trials carried out to translocate it to rainforests in the Singapore Botanic Gardens. So what NParks did was to create artificial phytothems. So what these frogs need for breeding is they need these microhabitats called phytothems. So these are naturally occurring tree holes that get filled up with rainwater, and then things like leaves fall into it, and then the frogs actually use those to breed. So what NParks did was to create artificial ones, so like logs, then you go and make a hole and let it fill up with rainwater, let the leaves drop in, and then you try to translocate the tadpoles from another location into rainforests and Singapore Botanic Gardens, and that worked pretty well. So now we have a breeding population in Singapore Botanic Gardens, and there are trials to introduce a population to Pulau Ubin as well. That's currently ongoing. Yeah, so it's one of the successes of the Species Recovery Program.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to see them on Ubin, because I'm sure I don't know if there are any records, but I think they might have occurred there in the past as well. at least when it was more of a lush island. But it would be really cool to find them there.
Yeah, it'll be cool.
Make
So
one
now,
of these days.
we're seeing if it will work because the forest in Ubin is a lot different from the forest we have in like the mature rainforest that we have in Singapore.
Also, one more point about like the phytotheon breeding frogs. Quite a lot of them require primary to like mature secondary forest, because that's when you get really massive trees, and when branches break off, it forms like this tree cavity. So very young forests lack those large trees and just don't have the phytothems. So it's a really good initiative that they're creating like artificial ones. So that's actually removing like that limiter on the population. So a lot of them can start breeding in artificial phytothems. Yeah.
How about you guys?
So for HSS, we do have a few initiatives. The main one being the Frog Call Library. So that was an initiative that actually I started, 2016? In 2016.
Yes.
Trying to compile all the frog calls of all the frog species in Singapore. We do also have a roadkill database, but that is both for reptiles and amphibians. We're trying to study the impact of roadways adjacent to forested patches and to see the incidences of, firstly, how many roadkill species are reptiles and amphibians, and whether or not there's like a particular species that's more impacted by it. Yeah, and of course we do have outreach programs for frogs as well. So we attend things like the Festival of Biodiversity. I'm sure the three of us have definitely volunteered. We've given up many hours for the outreach of frogs. Or not given up, but like willingly volunteered.
Willingly put in.
Yes, willingly put in.
Lovingly put in.
Yeah. And of course we have our posters and occasionally we give talks as well.
I'm seeing a lot of potential in this frog call library for like producing nice soundscapes, or maybe you want to remix it in with like some popular pop songs. But besides that, what's the importance of the frog call library for research and maybe wider conservation?
So it's the same thing with building a species list, right? The first thing you do when it comes to conservation is you need to know what's in an area. And for the Singaporean context, we didn't actually have an established frog call library. We had a few here and there, but not one consolidated one where it had majority of the species. And actually, most of the frog calls that I actually had to go on record and either learn the calls myself or have them taught to me by mentors. So they knew the calls. My mentors knew the calls, but they didn't have it recorded or didn't have it written down anywhere. So it's very, very important to catalog the advertisement call. So the advertisement call is basically usually made by male frogs. Of course, there are exceptions where both male and females call. It's the main call that is used to attract mates and establish their territory. So within frogs themselves, there are, I think, about 12 different call types. The one that's studied the most is actually the advertisement call because that conveys the most information. It's used in research papers to actually differentiate closely related species because they are the most distinct one and that's the one you hear the most often. The rest of them are kind of like defensive calls, or when the frog gets attacked and when it's calling as a warning call kind of thing, where it's a lot more difficult to study. So advertisement calls are the ones that are studied the most and the ones that give the most information. So it's important both for research because it allows us to detect more frog species and more frog individuals, but it's also important for things like environmental impact assessments where you might not see the frogs during visual surveys, but you can actually hear them. So it confirms their presence at those sites.
Yeah. I guess that would help with like rapid assessments. Like if there's a small window of time, you might not be able to look at everything, but you can detect them like by your ear and you can just confirm the species occurs in this area.
Right.
It also helps with like distributional records because then it allows you to leverage on a lot of citizen scientists to go out, listen for frog calls and sign, if let's say a very common species, it's like drastically declined across the region and sign nobody hears it, then that would be an indication like maybe there's something going on and potentially like scientists can go and investigate like what contributes to such a decline.
The frog call library is like a super good resource and now like all surveyors can learn from it. It's really amazing that we have this actually. Because if not, if you don't have a mentor to basically go down with you to identify the frog and teach you, oh, that's the call. whatever frog. But now we have it in the frog call library. So it's like, for birds, there's a lot of resources out there like Xenocanto.
Yeah.
People can just like learn the calls by just on their phone. They can like learn the calls and before they go out to the field, or they can verify when they're in the field. But with the frog call library, there's something like that the surveyors and other people in the EIA field can also learn in Singapore. So yeah, it's a very, very important resource. And then also about the point of us, usually you hear the frogs first before you see them. Also because when you're doing it in this field of you're protecting the environment, you're trying to conserve, you don't want to go bashing into the forest to like cover all ground to visually identify the frog. So being able to hear the frog call, you don't have to actually walk so much into the vegetation. You can stick to your transect and you can hear and detect the calls from a very far distance away. So that actually helps in conservation.
Now you have like acoustic, I don't know if you call them traps or whatever, but they're like camera traps, but just for sound.
For soundscape.
Passive
yeah.
acoustic.
So could you
monitors.
use that to monitor frogs?
It's like soundscape analysis.
Yeah.
Right.
Where there are, because when you record like a soundscape, it's not only just frog calls. You have like katydids, you have like birds, you have ambient noise. So it's very hard to quantify like what sort of noises are like ecologically important. But for frogs specifically, so far there is no easy way to actually identify what calls are in a soundscape recording. Somebody has to manually go through and listen, or at least search the recording for the spectrograms.
And how has the experience been like kind of compiling this audio library or call library?
It's been interesting. So basically what's happening a lot of the time is I usually go to like areas that are accessible by members of the public at night. So I go to those accessible areas like Botanic Gardens or Mandai and places like that. So it largely involves me standing in the dark with a recorder pointed at a frog that I may or may not be able to see. And I literally just stand in the darkness for like up to about 20 minutes. And I usually kind of like give up at the 10-minute mark, because if the frog's not calling by then, it's not going to call because I might have disturbed it with my light, or maybe my footfall disturbed it. Yeah. So that's generally the experience of compiling the frog calls. It's just me in the dark pointing a
Not
recorder.
particularly glamorous, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Have you freaked anyone out? Like, has anyone come across you in the dark?
No, not really actually. But the thing is, I always have to have someone with me. So it's most of the time it's Ingg Xin, my brother.
But he's always asking me to shut up because like, I'm making a bit of noise and it affects the recording. So I can't even move. I have to be standing there in the dark with him for like 10 minutes.
Just two people standing in the
Exactly,
dark with a mic pointed at the frog.
Yes, exactly. So because like in the past, when I've tried recording frogs, they're like off in the distance. They found some snakes and they're like shouting in the background, and I can actually hear it in the recording. So that recording wasn't usable.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I in the past I went out with more people, maybe like 3 or 4 people to record frogs. But the ideal number is actually 1. If I can do it safely by myself, I would. But I would not encourage anyone to go in the forest by themselves. Always have someone with you. So Ingg Xin is there basically to make sure I don't die.
Right.
Or like if I break something and he can actually like, just call like the emergency services or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but so far
Thankfully-
he hasn't.
Yeah, so nothing like that has happened.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, always do field works in pairs or
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Is the intention of the frog call library to become something like Xenocanto, where it's open to contributions and things like that, and wider than just Singapore?
Right now we have started going overseas, and like when we go overseas for our herp trips for fun, for holiday, we do occasionally record frogs, but that we don't do it as regularly as I would like. Definitely it would be great to be able to receive calls from other people, but currently it's actually hosted on SoundCloud, so I think we would need to get our own domain and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I think one of the issues that we sort of face, especially for frogs, is that there's a lot of taxonomic splits. So if you don't record what you actually know is a certain species and it gets split, it could be like confusing, like where you can attribute like different calls to different species by accident. And there are some calls that are very, very slightly different. I recall, I think we were doing a survey, then there was a katydid that sounded
Oh my
like
goodness,
a very
we
rare
wasted
frog.
like at least half an hour looking for the Ingersdorf toilet that did not exist there. Yeah, cause the Ingersdorf toilet, the call mimics insects, so it really sounds like some insects like katydids. So it really sounded like the frog, and we were so confused because we were like, we know this species doesn't occur here, but why are we hearing this call? And we were so disturbed. And then we were even betting each other. I was like betting $50 that it is not there. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, so like we were so disturbed that like where is the frog that is calling? So we were literally around the area. We're trying to make a clear recording so we can compare the what's it called?
The spectrogram.
The spectrogram. Yeah, so we were trying to make recordings to compare the spectrogram with the actual frog call that we know, and then trying to make a clean recording. At the same time, trying to look for this frog, whether it's even there. And then we spent like I think half an hour. We walked up and down that same stretch, and eventually we found a katydid making the sound, and we saw the katydid make the sound, and we were like, oh. But yeah, it really sounded very, very similar, and we were so confused. So we were sending it to each other because we were all on different surveys. So we were, my group was sending it to them, and we're sending it to other people to verify. Can you tell what is this? Yeah, and we were like in panic. But after that, we realized that it was a katydid, and we were like, oh, okay, that was very anticlimactic. But yes.
And I suppose this kind of like lends to the fact that like not all survey expertise is equal, because like if you were to put it into a sound program and actually look at the spectrograms itself, the calls between the Ingger's cross-to alert and the katydid is actually very different in terms of kilohertz. So I think it was a difference of about 4 kilohertz, which is distinct enough that you would not mix them up if you actually looked at the spectrogram.
Right.
But because none of us have perfect pitch, and none of us, it's a small enough difference that without a reference call, they can be mistaken for each other.
So the spectrogram is like a visual representation of what the call would look like visually. So it's like squiggle of line that will show the kilohertz and
decibels.
Yeah,
usually,
decibels. Yeah.
It's a bit like the heart rate monitor in hospitals.
Yeah,
right?
something that's visualized.
yeah.
They visualize the sound into something visual for you to differentiate.
Yeah. And actually, I have when they were trying to record the frog, some people like,
they were making noise. They were talking. Like usually, like what you say, you're trying to record a frog. Some people calling about a snake.
Yeah, exactly.
And then so somebody was talking in the background. And then I was like, shh. And then in the spectrogram,
you can see a wall of red. It's just Ying's going shh.
My shh was very angry on the spectrogram.
So I cut it out.
Can imagine. Yeah.
Just a shh. Ing's shh spectrogram.
That's some really insightful information. I really enjoyed talking about frogs with you guys. I think people should be talking about frogs all the time. They're really cute and deserve to be treasured. Thank you for listening to this episode of That's Wild. If you'd like to hear more, please tune in for more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you like our content, don't forget to show your support by hitting the follow button and giving us a 5-star rating.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and thank you for listening.
Thanks everybody. Bye.